It was a crisp, unsettling morning at 3 a.m. when I received a call that would haunt me for years. The voice on the other end was shaky, barely holding it together. A woman, clearly in distress, told us she had woken up to find her husband missing. The back door was wide open, and the kitchen drawer where they kept the knives was ajar. Her voice cracked as she explained that her husband, who had been battling lung cancer, might be wandering the woods, lost and possibly trying to harm himself. Officer Mike and I rushed to the scene. When we arrived, the woman was already standing by the door, visibly shaken and on the verge of collapsing. She had been calling out for her husband in the backyard, but there was no response. I could see the fear in her eyes, her desperation filling the air like a heavy fog. Officer Mike took a seat with her on the front porch, trying to calm her while I went around back to search the yard. The fence in the backyard was low, barely waist high, and I easily jumped over it to begin my search. The woods behind the house seemed endless, dark and foreboding. I walked deeper into the trees, calling out for the missing man, when something caught my eye, a trail of blood. My heart raced. This couldn't be good. I followed the trail, my flashlight flicking over the ground and trees, praying it would lead me to him. But then I heard it, footsteps, soft, deliberate, almost like someone was trying to avoid detection. I froze, scanning the darkness. There, just ahead, I saw him. A man in a white shirt and blue pajama pants stumbling through the woods, a knife gripped tightly in his right hand. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the eerie silence of the woods. But he didn't listen. Instead, he quickened his pace, weaving in and out of the trees like he was being chased or like he was trying to escape. I pulled out my taser and cautiously moved forward, trying to keep my distance, my senses on high alert. Then, just as quickly as he appeared, he vanished behind a massive oak tree. I hesitated. There was something off about this whole situation. Slowly, I began to circle the tree, shining my flashlight in every direction, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. But when I rounded the tree, nothing. The man was gone, vanished, as if the woods had swallowed him whole. Just then, my radio crackled. "Officer Lee," it was Officer Mike's voice. "We found the man. He's inside the house." Confused, I backed away from the tree, my flashlight still trained on the spot where the man had been. I turned and hurried back to the house, my heart pounding in my chest. When I arrived, I saw Officer Mike helping paramedics load the man onto a stretcher. The man was alive, but barely. He looked pale, weak from blood loss, his body shaking as the paramedics worked quickly to stabilize him. I stared in disbelief. The man was wearing the exact same white shirt and blue pajama pants that I'd seen in the woods. I asked Officer Mike what had happened. He explained that they had found the man hiding in the kitchen pantry, his wrists slit, blood pooling on the floor beneath him. He had almost bled out, but had narrowly missed severing the main artery. Despite their best efforts, the man died at the hospital hours later, succumbing to complications from his cancer. But here's the part that still chills me to the bone. The man I saw in the woods was already supposed to be inside the house, lying on a gurney. I don't know what I saw that night, whether it was a ghost, a figment of my imagination, or something far worse. But the image of that man in the white shirt and blue pajama pants walking away into the darkness, only to vanish without a trace, still gives me chills every time I close my eyes. It was a cold, quiet night in 2002, one of those evenings where the air feels thick with an unspoken tension. I was patrolling near 7th Avenue when the crackle of my radio broke the silence. Dispatch had a call, urgent. Shelley, our dispatcher, sounded unnerved, her voice trembling slightly. "It's a woman," Shelley said. "She's crying uncontrollably and threatening to take her own life. I'm still on the line with her. Here's the address." I didn't waste a second. Spinning my car around, I raced toward the location, every instinct on high alert. As I drove, Shelley kept me updated. "She's still crying," she said. "She can barely speak, but she's holding on. Hurry." By the time I pulled up to the house, Shelley's voice came back. Quieter now, she just hung up. The house stood there, small and weathered, painted a dull blue that looked almost gray under the dim light. Something about it unsettled me, like a memory trying to claw its way back. And then it hit me. This was the house. 8 years ago, a little girl had fallen from the second-story window here. She didn't survive. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I knocked on the door, and it creaked open moments later. A boy, maybe 5 years old, peered up at me with wide eyes. Behind him stood another child, a toddler, clutching the older boy's leg. "Hey there," I said gently. "Where's your mum?" The older boy pointed upstairs. "She's with the baby," he said softly. Their voices snapped me back to the present. These weren't the same people from 8 years ago. That family had been Hispanic. These children were Asian. I asked about their dad, and the older boy said he was out hunting. Then I heard it, a piercing cry, a baby's wail echoing from upstairs. I knelt to their level. "Can you take me to your mom?" I asked. The older boy shook his head. "She doesn't let us go upstairs," he whispered. Something about his tone, the unease in his little voice, made my stomach twist. I reassured them with a smile. "It's okay, you stay right here, I'll go check on her." As I climbed the narrow staircase, the baby's cries grew louder, sharper. At the top, I found a closed door. I knocked firmly. "Police!" I called out. No answer, just the relentless crying. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. "I'm coming in," I shouted, bracing myself. With one forceful kick, the door flew open. The room was dim, lit only by moonlight filtering through a window. A crooked bed sat in the middle, and on it lay a tiny, screaming infant, no more than a couple of months old. But my eyes were drawn to something else. A thick rope was tied to the bed frame, trailing out through the same second-story window where that little girl had fallen years ago. My heart pounded as I rushed to the bed, scooping up the baby in my arms. I leaned out the window, and that's when I saw her, the mother. She was dangling lifelessly, her body swaying slightly in the cold night air, suspended by the rope. My blood turned to ice. Acting on instinct, I cut the rope, watching her body collapse into the backyard below. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. By the time I made it downstairs, the ambulance and fire trucks had arrived. Paramedics and firefighters rushed to the backyard while I stayed inside with the baby. Minutes later, they brought her out on a stretcher, her body covered with a stark white sheet. I stopped one of the paramedics. "How long has she been dead?" I asked. He hesitated, then answered, "At least 2 hours. 2 hours. My stomach dropped. 2 hours, I whispered. That couldn't be right. Shelley had been on the phone with her just minutes before I arrived. Who made that call? Inside the house, I searched frantically, finding only one phone, a landline in the dining room. I turned to the boys. "Did your mum or anyone else use the phone tonight?" I asked. They both shook their heads. Later we learned that the mother had been battling severe postpartum depression. There were prescription bottles in her room, all untouched. She had chosen to end her life, tying the noose to the very window where another child's life had tragically ended years before. But the phone call, that chilling, desperate voice on the line, it remains a mystery, one that haunts me to this day. Who or what called for help that night? It was 2:30 a.m. when we received the call. A frantic, terrified man on the other end, his voice trembling with fear. He said his wife was acting unnaturally. She was upstairs, slamming her head against the walls, thrashing violently and holding a pair of scissors. He feared for his life, unable to confront her alone, pleading with us to help. Officer Thomas and I immediately sped to the address, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. When we arrived, the man's face was pale, his hands shaking as he opened the door. He led us inside, his arm showing a fresh stab wound, blood oozing from a punctured vein, but not enough to be life-threatening. The man had tried to stop her, but she was too far gone. Officer Thomas went to get the first aid kit, while I made my way upstairs to assess the situation. The atmosphere in the house was unsettling, as though something was off, something we couldn't see but could feel in our bones. The bedroom door at the end of the hallway was ajar. Inside I found the wife, her behavior disturbing but not entirely unexpected. The man had mentioned she was locked in the master bedroom, and their teenage daughter, Erica, had locked herself in her room as well. The tension in the house was palpable. thick enough to suffocate you. I reached the door of the master bedroom. I noticed the bathroom light was on, but the door was locked. I knocked and waited. The voice that came from inside sent a chill down my spine. "Go away," she sobbed. "Leave my family alone." The voice was soft, pleading, broken, but unmistakably hers. I tried to reassure her, my voice steady, calm, hoping she'd listen. "Let's talk. Open the door, please." But then, something impossible happened. A second voice joined the first from the other side of the house. It was Erica, her voice frantic. "Dad? Dad, did you call the cops? Tell them to leave. Mom's okay. She's with me." Both Officer Thomas and I exchanged a look of pure disbelief. Erica emerged from her room as the man made his way upstairs. "Dad, Mom's okay," she said, almost too casually for the gravity of the situation. "She's with me in my room." The room was dead silent for a moment. Who was in the bathroom then? We rushed to the bathroom door, which was unlocked by the husband. Inside, there was no sign of the wife, but on the floor a pair of bloodied scissors and clumps of hair were scattered. The sight made my stomach turn. The scissors, those very scissors she'd been holding, were abandoned as if thrown aside in desperation. We turned to the family, but their faces were confused. There shouldn't have been anyone in the bathroom. The wife was taken to the hospital for evaluation. The family likely moved out after that. But the events of that night never left me. About a year later, a new family moved into the same house, completely unaware of its past. One early morning, we got another call. A man had been rushed to the hospital after being stabbed by his sleepwalking wife. She had woken up in a trance-like state, grabbed the scissors and stabbed him while he slept. Miraculously, he survived. The house, it had a dark history. Years earlier, a woman had ended her life in that very same bathroom, unable to cope with her husband's betrayal. She had taken her own life after discovering his infidelity, her spirit seemingly bound to that place, torturing anyone who dared to call it home. As a police officer for over 12 years, this experience haunts me still. The chilling cries of a woman who wasn't there, the scissors, the hair, and the unexplained behavior. It's an experience I will never forget. It makes my blood run cold to this day. And no matter how many years pass, I'll never step foot in that house again. It was the night of July 4th when a call came in that would haunt me for years to come. The dispatcher said it was a danger to self situation involving a woman. At first it seemed like another routine call, something we dealt with often. Most times we'd show up, make sure everything was under control, and transport the individual to a hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. But that night, something felt different. My partner Jonah and I arrived at the house to the sound of frantic screams coming from inside. We knocked, and after a moment, 2 young children opened the door. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with terror, and they barely managed to nod when we asked if they were okay. Something was terribly wrong. As we stepped inside, the smell of tension hit us first. The father was standing in the hallway, visibly shaken, begging with his wife, who had locked herself in their bedroom. His voice was trembling as he told us she'd gone in with a knife and locked the door. The screams had stopped, but the silence was thick with dread. The situation wasn't clear, but we had no time to waste. We knocked on the bedroom door, but no answer came. The husband, desperate, used a coin to unlock the door, and we entered, tasers at the ready. What we saw inside made my stomach drop. The bedroom light flickered on, revealing her, dressed in traditional funeral clothes, lying motionless on the bed. But what sent chills down my spine wasn't just her strange attire, it was the knife. She had it lodged in her mouth, biting down on the tip, and blood was pooling on the pillow beneath her. I couldn't make sense of it. The air in the room felt cold, suffocating, as if we were intruding on something much darker than a simple mental health crisis. Jonah and I tried to talk to her, gently urging her to release the knife. But she didn't respond. Her eyes were vacant, distant, like she wasn't even there. I moved quickly, grabbing her wrist to prevent her from harming herself. Jonah restrained her other arm. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she released the knife and we helped her sit up. We stayed with her in the room until the ambulance arrived. But as we waited, the husband told us a story that made my blood run cold. He explained that every year, without fail, his wife would go crazy on the 4th of July. I assumed it was a psychological trigger, maybe some trauma from the past. But what he said next, I still don't know what to think. He claimed his wife wasn't just suffering from mental illness, she was possessed by the ghost of her grandmother. The story behind it was chilling. His wife, he said, had been completely normal except every July 4th. That's when the nightmares started, when the violent episodes occurred. The grandmother had a history too. Back in Southeast Asia, she had been mentally unstable, possessed, according to the family. They had kept her tied up in a small hut during the Vietnam War to keep her away from the rest of the family. The wife's family had fled when the Vietnamese army attacked their village, leaving the grandmother behind, tied and helpless in that hut. As the bombs went off and gunfire echoed in the distance, the grandmother, terrified, had a heart attack and died alone, abandoned. But here's the truly horrifying part. The husband believed that on every 4th of July, his wife was haunted by her grandmother's ghost, reliving the moment of fear, being tied up and left behind with the gunfire still ringing in her ears. The fireworks, the explosions triggered something deep inside her, and every year she would become a vessel for that terror, consumed by the same fear that had once killed the grandmother. An elder shaman had warned the husband that the ghost never left, that it still haunted his wife, possessing her body every year, reliving that final horrifying moment. The terror was passed down through blood. As I stood there, trying to absorb the weight of what he was saying, I could feel the oppressive atmosphere in the room, a sense that something beyond human was at play here. I've dealt with all kinds of calls in my career, but nothing ever shook me like that night. Even now, when I hear fireworks, when I see the flashes of color lighting up the night sky, I can't shake the feeling that something else is lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to awaken again. It was a night blanketed in eerie stillness, the kind where even the wind seemed hesitant to stir. Our dispatch kept buzzing with calls from a countryside home 3 times in total. But every time we arrived, the family inside insisted they hadn't dialed 911. Their confusion mirrored ours. Why would a house keep summoning us if no one within its walls had called? It wasn't uncommon back in the 1990s for families new to the US, especially those struggling with English, to rely on 911 as an unspoken cry for help. Dial, hang up, and wait for the police. It was a quiet assurance that someone would come, even if words failed. But this situation was different. It gnawed at us, pulling us back to the house once more. The family, a Southeast Asian household, greeted us with polite yet bewildered expressions. Again, they denied making the calls. Their compliance, though tinged with frustration, reflected the cultural deference to authority I'd seen throughout my career. Something didn't sit right. We asked for their permission to search the property just to ensure everything was okay. Reluctantly, they agreed. Room by room, the house yielded nothing unusual, but as we moved to the backyard, an old shed tucked in the shadows caught our attention. Light seeped through the cracks, a stark contrast to the darkened home behind us. My partner Jenny and I exchanged glances before approaching the shed. The door creaked open to our knock, revealing a teenage girl. Her face was pale, her expression startled but not frightened. When we asked if she had called 911, her answer was firm, no. As the girl stood in the doorway, something behind her caught Jenny's eye. A newborn baby swaddled in worn blankets. Jenny's motherly instincts kicked in. She asked if she could take a closer look, and the girl reluctantly allowed her in. The baby was fragile, its shallow breaths and pale complexion sending alarm bells through both of us. Concern etched into Jenny's face as she asked, "Why are you and your baby living out here? Why not inside the house?" Tears welled in the girl's eyes as she explained. Her family had banished her to the shed because she wasn't married, and her boyfriend had abandoned her. In their culture, having a baby out of wedlock was a source of shame. Her voice cracked as she shared how deeply her parents' disappointment cut, leaving her to fend for herself and her newborn in the cold, unforgiving shed. Jenny's gentle voice coaxed the girl into letting us help. "Your baby needs immediate medical care," she urged. Together we drove the girl and her infant to the hospital. The following days unraveled a deeper mystery. Jenny, who'd grown attached to the girl's plight, visited her regularly at the hospital. It was during one of these visits that the truth came to light, a truth that still sends chills down my spine. Through trembling words, the girl admitted that she hadn't made any of the calls to 911 that night. She didn't even have a phone in the shed. But then she added something that made Jenny's hand freeze mid-motion as she cradled the baby. "My grandmother used to call 911 all the time," the girl said, tears streaming down her face. "She'd hang up whenever my grandfather got sick. She passed away 3 months ago. But maybe it was her trying to save my baby." The girl's words lingered in the air, heavy with both sorrow and hope. Could it be that her grandmother, even in death, had reached out to protect her and her child? It felt impossible, yet the timing of the calls and the girl's revelation painted a picture that defied explanation. After the mother and baby were discharged, we worked tirelessly to connect them with public assistance. Jenny even went above and beyond, ensuring they had a safe place to stay and the resources to start anew. But neither of us could shake the feeling that something otherworldly had intervened that night. Perhaps love, even in its most intangible form, transcends the barriers of life and death. To this day, that experience remains etched in my memory. It wasn't just another call or another case. It was a haunting reminder that sometimes help comes from places we can't see or understand. Jenny and I still talk about it occasionally, our voices hushed, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile veil between worlds. The girl's grandmother may have been gone, but her love for her family lingered, a silent guardian watching over the shadows. And on that cold night, she made sure the cries from the shed were heard, even if it meant dialing from beyond the grave.